I'm Christina Maxwell. I'm the Director of Programs at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. And I'm thrilled to be here this morning, and it's really great to see so many people here, some of whom I know and many of whom I don't know, which is exciting. In order to make sure that we're all on the same page as we start this day, because we are from so many different diverse groups working on different aspects of the food system and food security and food access, I've been asked to present a couple of definitions, just so we at least have a little bit of a common vocabulary to work with for the day. And then I'll also talk about some of the goals for today. So one of the things that we've already mentioned a couple of times and we'll be spending the day talking about is food security. So what is food security? We use that term a lot. We toss it around. There are about 1 million definitions of it, depending on who you ask or which organization you look at. And so we are today going to use two different and overlapping definitions of food security. One is household food security, sometimes just referred to with the shorthand of food access. And according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the definition of household food security is the household's physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So that's sort of a long way of saying you have enough food, it's good food, it's food that you like, and it's enough food to keep you healthy and active to do the things you need to do every day. So that's food security when we talk about it on a household level. But then we can also talk about community food security and what that means, or regional food security. And that's often shorthanded with the idea of local food. But what are we really talking about when we're talking about regional food security? Basically, the ability of an area to produce adequate food for the needs of the population. And why is that an important thing? Because it reduces our dependence on imports, it supports regional economic growth, it supports regional sustainability. Current estimates suggest that Massachusetts as a whole is currently producing enough agricultural products to meet between 4% and 5.5% of our food needs. So there's a lot of agriculture in this area, but in the end, maybe it's a small amount. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. At the same time, when we're talking about household food security, nearly 100,000 people in Western Massachusetts are food insecure. I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute. 100,000 people in the 4 counties of Western Massachusetts are food insecure, which basically means they're not sure where their next meal is coming from. That's 1 in every 5 children. 1 in every 8 adults, or 8 residents overall. 1 in every 5 children. And statewide, as I'm sure you can imagine, over the past 10 years, the level of household food insecurity has risen quite substantially. Okay, so given those two definitions, what are our goals for today? The primary goal of today's forum is to nurture the intersection of household food security and regional efforts to increase regional food security. How do those two things overlap? Where do they overlap and where should they overlap where perhaps right now they're not? And how can we work towards creating a larger overlap between the idea of household food security and regional food security? So first, a caveat. It's important to know, as I'm sure you're all sitting there thinking, this is a really simplistic diagram trying to illustrate a very large and complex problem, and that's okay. I hope you'll take this diagram in the spirit in which it's intended, which is just a tool to help us talk about these issues. It's not supposed to be the beginning and the end of the discussion here. So this is really just a tool for us to use. I'm going to refer back to the 6 characteristics of a sustainable regional food system that Sam talked about just a few minutes ago. One thing that we can do is array these along the spectrum of food access. So while all of them sort of overlap and bleed into different parts, they can be roughly arrayed along the spectrum from dealing with household or individual food security and then moving along to the idea of regional food security. Or they fall somewhere in between, truly where those two aspects of food security do overlap. And this can be an interesting way for us to just think about our own work or our own personal lives in relation to food and how that work fits into this larger picture, this spectrum. So for example, the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, where I work, is focused almost entirely on household food security. We distribute 7 million pounds of emergency food throughout Western Massachusetts every year to people who literally don't know where their next meal is coming from. So that's very much dealing with household food security. But we try really hard to move ourselves into the middle once in a while, because we don't want to just be putting a Band-Aid on the problem of hunger today. We would actually like to be seeing the problem of hunger addressed at its root and dealt with and overcome. We want to help people become more self-sufficient so they don't need to rely on the emergency food system. And most of the time, when we do that, we do it in partnership with other organizations, in collaboration, in cooperation with other organizations. And this is one of the keys to understanding a regional food system, is understanding that nobody has to do everything. No one person or one organization has to be addressing all of this. You couldn't. You'd make yourself crazy. You might already feel crazy with whatever one single thing you're working on. It's such a huge issue. But we don't each have to do everything. The idea is that together we do everything. So this is an important reason why PVGrows exists and why the Food Bank, for one, has been a supporter of PVGrows from the beginning, because we feel that it's so important for organizations and people who are working all along this spectrum to come together, as Sam said, to lift our heads up off the daily grind and have a chance to talk with each other, to share ideas, to expand our networks, and to come up with new ways of addressing different aspects of these problems. So the food bank, as the example that I'm using here, feels like, yes, we have a niche. We feed those 100,000 people today. We'd like to expand that work a little bit, and we can do that in collaboration and cooperation with other people. So I hope that you will address the day in that same spirit of thinking of where you currently stand in your organization, but also where perhaps you'd like your organization to be. So the question that we're left with then is, what if these two circles were to overlap completely, and we didn't have a difference or a distinction between household food security and regional food security? But what if they were completely married and overlapped? What would that look like for us? What would it look like in our daily lives? What would it look like at work when we went to work every day? These are some of the things that we're going to be exploring and talking about throughout the day today. And so a little bit later on, as Sam mentioned, several of us are going to be back to talk about the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's food security document that's just been released. So I'll be back in a bit, but I want to leave you with this idea and just thinking about this idea of food security and what it would look like if we were all sort of working towards melding those two circles together.
My name is Javiera Benavente, and I'm going to facilitate an exercise that's going to help us explore this whole thing that has just been talked about, the spectrum of work within food security, both including food access on one end of the spectrum and then local food on the other end of the spectrum. So in a minute, I'm going to have you all stand up and move to the back of the room. And if you want to just kind of like look back there for the moment, we're going to imagine on the left-hand side of the room is food access work. And on the right-hand side of the room is local food work. And in the middle is everything in between and where that work overlaps. And so in this exercise, I'm going to ask you all to put your bodies where the bulk of your work exists today. And I know that many of you wear multiple hats and do multiple pieces of work. So you can either choose one hat. So if there's one organization that you're really excited to think about right now, you can choose that work. Or you can think about your work as it is integrated and go to where your work lies today on this spectrum of food access on one end